I'm super happy to welcome you here today to the Faculty Research Panel. As you know, our presenters this afternoon are going to tell you a little bit about the work or their recent publication, and then they're also going to talk to you about the writing process, okay? Our goal for today is to give each presenter some time to share some information with you, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So, my name is Jeanne Hodgkinson. I'm a professor of communication studies here at CRC, and I'm also the coordinator for professional development, and I'm so grateful to have you all here. I would like to start today by introducing each of our panelists. And our first panelist is Nino Conley. Nino is an adjunct associate professor of communication studies here at CRC. Mr. Conley's areas of interest include instructional communication, media communication, intercultural communication. Mr. Conley earned his bachelor's degree in media communication as well as his master's degree in communication studies from California State University, Sacramento, where he was also a scholar of the Ronald E. McNair Post-Baccalaureate Achievement Program. And this is Professor Conley. Welcome. Our second speaker, should we clap for Nino? Let's just do it. Thank you. Our second speaker is Jeanne Edman. She is a cross-cultural psychologist. She received her PhD from the University of Hawaii in Manoa. Professor Edman taught both undergraduate and graduate courses within the University of Hawaii system. She worked as a faculty researcher in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Hawaii Medical School, and she has co-authored more than 35 publications in psychology, psychiatry, and public health peer-reviewed journals. She's the co-author of a psychology research methods textbooks, and she conducted psychological research studies in Malaysia, the Philippines, Hawaii, California, and Micronesia. Finally, she has presented research at numerous conferences, including international conferences in Asia, Australia, Europe, South and North America. And that's Professor Edman. Welcome. Our third speaker today is Timaree Hagenburger, who is a full-time nutrition professor, professional speaker working in corporate wellness, and certified exercise physiologist. She has regular segments on California Bountiful TV, a monthly newspaper column, and a resource-rich website. And you can find her at thenutritionprofessor.com. She's also the author of The Foodie Bar Way, one meal, lots of options, everyone's happy. Timaree cherishes opportunities to connect with those around her and share her knowledge and passion for food, physical activity, and good health. Her style is fun and practical. She often offers strategies and inspiration for finding pleasure in preparation and partaking in nourishing meals because life is better when you, and this is her quote, love the food that loves you back. Our Timaree. Good. Our final speaker today is Rick Schuber. Dr. Schuber is the Honors Program Director and Professor of Philosophy at CRC. He's also the winner of the college's 2010 Crystal Apple Award for Excellence in Education. He's an internationally recognized scholar of Asian philosophy and a pioneer in academic philosophy of the martial arts. He holds a PhD in philosophy from UC Davis and a fourth Dan master rank in the Korean martial art of Hapkido. His primary research explores the intersection of classical Asian philosophy and traditional martial arts. He has published 4 academic papers and presented over 40 more at local, regional, national, and international academic events. Dr. Schuber, welcome. Thank you. So now I would like to turn it over to our first speaker, Nino Conley, and his research that he's going to talk about today is a survey of instructional communication, 15 years of research in review. Professor Conley, welcome.
Thank you, guys. Now, this puts a lot of pressure on me because I teach public speaking in the comms department. So if I suck at this, I'm going to lose all credibility and all respect for my students. So the pressure is on right here. So my research is, as you can see, a survey of instructional communication, 15 years of research and review. As I stated, my name is Nino Conley. My co-author's name is Kimo Ayun. First, I would like to go over the research parameters. We conducted a manifest content analysis, so it was a quantitative inquiry. More precisely, it was a chi-square analysis, so we can see an equal distribution of nominal variables. The artifact was communication education, which is an academic journal. The unit of analysis was journal articles, and we reviewed a total of 456 studies. The investigated variables were as followed. We covered theory, method, participants, topics, and author contributions. My results were as followed. Theory, we looked at a chi-square analysis of theory used versus no use. These are my results. For method, we looked for survey versus other. These are my results. For participants, to have some inference about the data source, we looked at unequal distributions of groups and college students, which comprise the largest group, versus other, and these are my results. We also looked at topics and subject matters covered in the journal. These are the results. No chi-square analysis conducted, only the quantities were tallied. And last, we looked at author contributions. Again, no chi-square analysis. So what do you guys think of my results? Interesting, right? Pretty cool, right? How do you feel about my research right now? You don't feel anything, right? You feel boredom. You're thinking, oh my God, why did I come here? I read research panel, and I thought, maybe I should go somewhere else, maybe I should make up an excuse, but I showed up, and this is exactly what I expected, right? So boredom is what you're feeling right now, right? And that is a common misconception when we talk about research, right? There's this disconnect, you feel bored, less interested. What else? What else is a conception, right? These are the thoughts we often have when talking about or even conceiving of research, right? Something abstract, something elusive. Then there's disinterest, like, research is important, I get it, but that's for other people. I like sports and pizza. I don't really have an interest in research. Then there's a sudden fatigue syndrome. That's when you come to class energetic, motivated, and then you're confronted with research and statistics and all kinds of complex writing, and you think like, oh, so tired all of a sudden, so tired, right? Then we have the headaches and mental discomfort, right? You are confronted with charts and graphs and, again, complex language, and all of a sudden you're thinking like, oh, I don't feel so well. You question your life choices, right? You think like, why did I come here, right? And why did I sign up for this? Research seems to be a steep hill to climb. And the worst case, there's only one case of this so far documented in my classes, is actually death from boredom. Now, I have to give a disclaimer here. I did not instruct my students to pose like this for these pictures. Usually my students like a lot of instructions and writing, and they want examples and ask a lot of questions. This time they were like, we supposed to act like we're bored in class? Hold my beer. Like, we got this, right? Don't worry about it. And I think they did a really good job at this. But that is a preconceived notion of research in general. Just this general apathy. And I know what you're thinking. Well, I know somebody who's into research. Yeah, there's always like this one student that is really interested, right, and really happy. Right, Kenesha? But we want to get more students interested in research in general, okay? Now the question is, why is that? Why is there this preconceived notion that we associate research with something boring, something abstract, something elusive? For this, like from my experience conducting this research, I kind of came up with like 2 items just for the sake of this presentation here, which is, short and sweet. And that is, 1, there's a lack of understanding. When I showed you guys the chi-square analysis, you guys were thinking like, okay, these are a bunch of numbers. How can you even quantify behavior or facts in such a way that you can draw such inferences, right? But that's just something that we have to acquire step by step. Nobody expects you to come onto a college campus as a freshman or as a sophomore and be able to pick up an academic journal and flip through it and go like, oh, this is very interesting, right? You have to kind of work your way up to it. The other thing is just a misconception of research in general. Like when you hear research, you may not think of what it actually is. Do you guys know what the STEM disciplines are? What does the S stand for? Engineering and math. Okay, we got it. Together, teamwork, good job. Now, when we think about research in the STEM disciplines, that's cool stuff, right? We think about people looking at beakers and looking through microphones and trying to find cures for cancer and Alzheimer and advancing stem cell research. When we think about technology, we think about new apps and Google and Tesla and SpaceX and all those very, very prominent companies that we all aspire to work for one day, hopefully, right? And then in engineering, we see what incredible feats are made, right? People who lost a limb have like these cool artificial prosthetics now. Our cell phones are getting smaller and more powerful and waterproof now, which is still odd to me. You can just rinse it, feels odd. So there is no doubt that research in the STEM disciplines is valuable, and we have an idea. We have like a utility we get from it. That's why when you say, you know what, I would like to conduct research in the field of technology, engineering, people go like, oh wow, that's pretty impressive. You want to work for Apple or SpaceX one day? But when it comes to the social sciences and the humanities, now the conception changes. Now all of a sudden, research becomes something that's more abstract, it's more elusive. There's this misconception that real life takes place in the real world with real people and real problems and real interactions and real dynamics. And then removed, divorced from that, we have this isolated group, this entity called academia, where a bunch of intellectuals talk about these abstract concepts in their ivory tower that has no connection to real life. And that is a misconception. And that's something I came across, that prejudice in some way I came across as a communication scholar. When people say, what are you going to do with that? So you're trying to research communication dynamics, but you're converting it into numbers. So I don't know what the utility is, right? And that's something that we just have to debunk, and that's something I would like to challenge you guys to reconsider when you think about the social science and the humanities, so sociology, psychology, anthropology, literature. Because these things can have a real effect of your life, really important topics. Policing of our communities, how to prevent domestic violence, nutrition. Even when we just ponder principles of law and order or justice, that's where we need philosophy. That's where we need political science, right? So that's something you just want to keep in mind when we talk about research. And all of a sudden, research can become something concrete that also affects you, because we all have topics that are important to us and where we could hopefully make a change. So that's something I just want you to think about as we talk about research just in general, that in the social sciences and the humanities, it's not the STEM research, the STEM disciplines. It's not this one answer, 2 + 2 is always 4. If we create a more energy efficient solar panel, we can measure that it produces more energy. If you buy a newer car, you can go further with less gas. That's a fact. These are all things that we can agree on. But human interaction, or even like your internal workings through psychology, getting over post-traumatic stress, getting over identity issues or anything like that, that's complex. Human interaction is complex. Societies are complex. Communication is complex. So that's why what we're seeking to do is make progress incrementally. We don't have to find that one perfect answer. Sometimes it's enough if we get rid of bad ideas, right? And history has taught us that there are some bad ideas we hung on to for a long time. And just getting rid of those, that's progress. Just getting a little closer to the right answer is progress. Even finding an imperfect solution that is better than the status quo, that's also progress. So that's what you want to keep in mind. And that's what I was trying to do in the research where we did the survey of instructional communication studies, okay? So let's try that again, this time in a different way, okay? Instructional communication is a discipline that looks at the communicative aspect of teaching and learning in general, not just communication studies, just in general. What goes on during the communication processes in the classroom or any learning event, okay? And this is what happened, okay? My co-author, brilliant man, Dr. Kimo Ayun, who's at Marquette University, and I, myself, we're the two authors. And I have to make a comment for those of you who believe in conspiracy theory and time travel. Is this my co-author, or is this me from the future and I co-authored with my future self? My name is Nino, his name is Kimo. I don't know, I'll think about it, right? So we got together and we were trying to figure out what is the type of research that's coming out of the main journal that covers instructional communication research. What are we producing in our field of study, and how can it be used, how can it be leveraged to improve teaching and learning events and teaching and learning dynamics? That's the setup, that's the premise of the study, okay? What we looked at were different variables, and the variables are just different factors, different aspects we look at to kind of get a comprehensive idea of what's going on in the research. To this end, we looked at every single study that was released over the last 15 years, from 2000 to 2015. And we looked at every single study for the following variables. We looked at theories. What theories are used? Are there certain binding core theories? And we found there's a huge number of theories. They're all over the place. Now here, when I say we need to understand how research works, this is a really good example. When I submitted my research for publication, they had a lot of issues with my writing. They said they had attitude, I was condescending, had like this little tisk-tisk sound to it, preachy, like a lot of colorful adjectives. But they were able to look at the methods section and say, despite of this guy being, a little crass in his language, we can actually see what he's done, independent, objectively, of how it's being presented. And they said you cannot infer that there are no core theories just by counting theories. And I had to go back and say, because it's research, I could verify that this claim they made is actually true. So a large number of theories were used. Then there is the method section, and the method section is really important, when it comes to epistemology, or just the nature of knowledge that we're trying to assess. What type of knowledge are we getting? So picture it this way. If you're single and you're trying to get to know somebody, you can find out information about this person of interest by handing them a survey. And if they answer the survey truthfully, you will have some information of who this person is. Then you can hand them another survey and another one. And with every survey, the knowledge about this person does grow. But is it the same type of knowledge that you would get if you were to sit down with them and interview them? Like not formally, but kind of have a conversation with them. If you're a sociopath, is it the same knowledge you would get if you would trap them into a maze and then have like experiments with them, like set them up like the movie Saw and see how they react, right? Don't do that. But just by observing how somebody acts and reacts to certain situations, that gives you insight about them that you may have not gotten by just administering surveys or conducting interviews. So that's what we're looking at. And we saw most of the research that comes out of this journal was survey-based. That's not a good thing, that's not a bad thing, but it gives us insight about what type of knowledge is being created and how we can actually assess and analyze this information. Participants, the largest group were college students. As I said before, teaching and learning, of course, takes place between teachers and learners or students. But at the same time, the learning process is larger than that. There's parents, there's counselors, there's administrators, right? So the focus was a little too much on students for my taste, but again, that's not for me to judge, that's for the research to put out there so we can discuss. When it comes to topics and subject matters, immediacy, that's the perceived closeness you have between the instructor and the student. So do you make a lot of eye contact? Do you use the student's name? Do you put your hand on their shoulder if they did a good job? You know, that type of thing. That's a construct that was very, very thoroughly researched, amongst others, communication apprehension. But it was a continuation of research from the 90s and sometimes even the 80s. Something that we found was not what was in the research, but something that was not in the research. Something that struck me was, as our campuses become more inclusive and culturally diverse, and diversity of thought increases therefore, there was not a lot of research about diversity and how we can leverage this multiculturalism for our benefit. Also, I expected there to be more information about technology. I mean, we're really glued to our cell phones, we're relying on our cell phones, we're on our computers all the time. How does that affect the learning dynamics in the classroom? How can we adjust to that? So sometimes a finding can be a lack of something, not just what's in there. And then last, author contributions. We wanted to see, Dr. Ayun and I, what are the influences that created the content? And an interesting finding is that of the 456 studies, the 10 most contributing authors contributed almost 25%, almost a quarter of all research. Now again, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. That's something we can discuss. But knowing that's a fact, that's important. Because then we can say, you know what, instructional communication research is not just this co-created product, but it has certain influences. And that's something to acknowledge. Okay? So the key to successful research, in conclusion, so to speak, is learn how research really works. I was really impressed by Dr. Ayun. I used to, when I was a student of his, used to highlight stuff and read it 50 times and go through it and have notes. And then I would be prepared and I would come into his office and he would sit there with his feet on the desk and said, like, what you got there? And then he would kind of look at the abstract and flip to the methods section. And then he would kind of like fling it at me and go like, okay, this paper is about, and then he was able to explain what's going on in the paper better than I did, who highlighted everything. Because that's what research enables us to do. So learn how to understand it, and it will no longer become an abstract thing. It's going to give you a lot of detail of how it actually works. If somebody claims they know how well CRC students do in math, there's a lot of questions you can ask. How many students did you test to make a claim about CRC students and their math ability? A survey, if you handed out the survey, did you hand it out in front of the math department or in front of the philosophy department? That might give you a different answer, right? So these are things that you can find out by looking at the research. So this, what seems like complex, abstract language, actually is a means to produce greater clarity, not to murk things up. And the last thing is, keep in mind what research truly is. Again, we said there's a lot of topics worth pursuing. My colleagues here will share some of those with you, but you might have something that's dear to your heart, right? Overcoming inhibition, overcoming communication apprehension, finding your identity, preventing domestic violence, closing the achievement gap. There are so many topics out there worth pursuing, and research is a key to that because you can make the difference. Your name doesn't have to be LeBron James or Jennifer Lawrence to bring awareness to a topic. Because if you produce good research, that research would spark attention. Attention often leads to awareness, and that awareness can then be leveraged, but also by investigating the issue at hand, you have given us a better understanding of the problem. And when we have a better understanding to a problem, that's the first step to finding a solution and improving the status quo. So don't underestimate what you can do. Researchers are not just born, they are created, and they're created in learning institutions such as this. So please keep that in mind, and please keep in mind that sometimes you start off small because in the words of the anthropologist Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens or students like yourself can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. All right, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker, Jeanne Edman, will talk about her research titled Trauma and Psychological Distress Among Ethnically Diverse Community College Students. Welcome, Jeanne.
Hi, everyone. I didn't do a formal presentation because I kind of thought this is a, more casual, interactive kind of presentation. So anyway, I guess I'll start with a little bit about the background on how I ever ended up doing this particular topic on trauma among CRC students. As the description of my background mentioned, I lived in Hawaii for 20 years, and I go back and I do research there all the time, and I've done research on eating disorder, body dissatisfaction, and a variety of psychological issues that people might have, and I've done a lot of research cross-culturally. And how this research ever got started is kind of funny. I happened to be in a coffee shop, and this is how research can kind of follow you and kind of build. This was in Honolulu, and the two people next to me looked at my computer and they said, "Oh, it's so cute. Where did you get it?" And we started talking. It turned out that they were both psychologists in Honolulu that I didn't even know. I had never met them. And I started talking to one of the psychologists, and we knew some of the same people. I was living in California and working at CRC at the time. So anyway, we started chatting. We talked for 4 hours. It turned out people in Hawaii are more laid back, and they'll take 4 hours and talk to you. And so we found out we had a lot of research interests in common. But I did eating disorder, body dissatisfaction, depression, and this particular person was interested in trauma. And I thought, wow, we can combine our research. So what we did is, the following year, we met in Honolulu again, and we devised an instrument that we could look at all these different variables of people who are in distress. So that's kind of what happened with this publication. So meanwhile, I got 2 of students I was mentoring to get involved in the research. One of them is in medical school at UCLA now. So we got a couple publications. We were going back and forth in Hawaii. Now it's really kind of nice with email. You can send files back and forth and analyses and things like that. So anyway, it turned out to be a really successful research project, but part of it was just luck. And part of it is just being interesting and talking to people and finding out what other people do. So that's kind of, there's a spontaneous part. And so research, how many people here have somebody you know and you can't figure them out? A mother, a father, somebody you date, some classmate. Psychologists are really interested in trying to figure out people. Why is that person sad today? Why is that person not like what they were a year ago? And so the research we look at is trauma. And what we found was really surprising, and it is published, and if anybody's interested, I can send you a copy of the paper. I didn't really want to kind of show so many statistics and PowerPoint slides, because the time is quite limited. But anyway, we did a survey. That's what we did, and we have over 1,000 CRC students, so it was over several semesters. And what we looked at was trauma like domestic abuse, trauma in the home, but we also looked at things like depression, eating disorders, those kind of things. And because we had a large sample, we could look at it by different ethnic groups. And what was really interesting, and this tells you too how research can be brought outside the classroom, we found out that the trauma levels are very, very high on this campus. And I think people were really surprised. And so what we did with that, we found out many of our students have issues with whoever they're dating, or they've had robbery where someone showed a knife or a gun. These type of what we call interpersonal violence. How many people think that impacts your ability to do well at school if someone, last night held a gun to your head and tried to rob you? Or you have to go to court to testify and you have to miss an exam. So this was really interesting because I teach psychology, and I do have people, and I'm not a clinical psychologist, I'm a cross-cultural researcher, but I do have students when we talk about depression coming in my office and talking to me about issues. Guess which gender talks to me most? Female. Female are more likely to get help. So what was really interesting with the data, and these were my students, so I should know a lot, but I don't, we had very high interpersonal trauma. And I thought, wow, it makes me look at my students differently as a professor. Because when people come in late, or people drop out in the middle of the semester, guess what could be the problem? something going on at home. One of the, I don't remember all the statistics, but one of the statistics is about, on this campus, about 25% of the female students have been stalked. And where do community college students mostly live? In their own home, right? And do you think the stalker still knows where you live? You're not moving to Berkeley, you're not moving to Davis. Could that impact why some student doesn't come to class? So this, when I started looking at all the trauma levels and what's going on at home, if there's a lot of violence, maybe not against you, but among your parents, is that easy to study at home? You know, I might have to go to the library, I'm kind of afraid to leave because something might happen. So what was really interesting is I presented this to the people in the research office and then a few other people, and they said, we've got to present this to all the faculty. And so we've done 2 major presentations with faculty, and what we do is we have the faculty fill out the survey to see how much trauma they've had, and then we have CRC students' data. And what we find out is the faculty are shocked to see how much trauma is going on. And so one of the things we wanted to do on campus, and we really haven't followed it up, is, first of all, the data shows students here are very resilient. Most of these were my students, and most of these students passed the class. And I'm looking like, wow, if I had all of this going on, I don't know if I would pass the class. So that's an important thing to look at. But also, are there things we can do on campus to help students feel safe, help students who are going through trauma get help? One of the things I've been using this for is to try to get mental health services on campus, a better system to help people, well, if you're homeless, there's somebody you can go to that can kind of help you out, these kind of things. Another thing with the research that's kind of interesting, I was, again, at another coffee shop, and I am kind of a talker, and so I happened to talk to a couple men that were sitting next to me about politics, but then they wanted to know what research I was doing. So I showed one of the particular people who happened to be very close to Jerry Brown and very close to one of the congressmen. I showed him the data, and he couldn't believe it. He goes, wow, this is a group that, and I said, they're very resilient. These students all passed. He said, wow, that's really great, but people need to know that there's a lot of this stuff going on in the community, and what kind of services can we provide? So it was interesting. Does everybody know who Ami Bera is? I actually went to his chief of staff. He was in India with Obama at the time, President Obama, but presented to his chief of staff and a few community people this data. And so they were going to use it to try to see, are there more resources that we can actually get on our campus? Are there more resources? So what's very important with data, and again, psychological data, sociological data, communication data, data can be used to present to legislators, to get funding. Data is used in a lot of ways that can be what we call applied. They can help people, they can help faculty say, wow, I'm really hard on my students. Maybe I can try to find out if there's something going on at home if somebody's not coming to class. So psychological data, again, in that respect, is very, very useful. Does everybody kind of have an idea of what psychological data might be? And like how we would measure something like depression or eating disorder, that kind of thing. When you ask people like a set of symptoms, how often are you sad? How often do you cry? Those kind of things. And then what we can do is we can compare. And we get some really interesting gender differences, kind of predictable in certain ways. Women tend to be higher on depression and on eating disorders, but on some of the interpersonal trauma, with violence, with somebody threatening you with a weapon, we have higher levels among males. And we also found some really interesting ethnic differences that we presented. So anyway, so like what I would like to say is, I'm a statistician. How many people like math? Oh, good, there are some people. Usually there's like 1 or 2. Anyway, I don't love math, but I'm not afraid of it. And I always say, if you look at statistics, it's like putting faces on numbers. I like to find out things about people. I'm very social. I really like people. I want to make the world a better place. And statistics it's one way to do that. Because you reach different audiences, and there's certain people that say, oh, I don't care if you have somebody, we call them testimonials, somebody come up and talk about something bad that happened to them. They'll say that's only one person. But if you have a large number of people and you give a survey to a large group of people, then we can there's a certain group of people who say, oh, that's data. Now I understand that certain percentage of that group has this issue. And that's a lot of people. And that means it's a really important issue. And let's try to make a difference on however we can make a difference. So that's it. Also, I think I was kind of asked that one of the things to address is writing papers and doing the research itself. The research I do, they're very short publications. Psychology, the type of psychology I do mostly is scientific psychology. So again, it's heavy in statistics and what we call very concise writing. Very short paragraphs, don't put extra words in. If you publish, they have to pay a certain amount per page, so they don't want it very long. But what's very interesting, it takes me so many hours to write maybe 6 or 8 paragraphs. And I've been doing it for years. So I know students get frustrated. I used to teach research methods, and they go, oh, you know, you really ripped apart my paper, and it took me like 4 hours to write these 5 paragraphs. And I go, well, it would take me maybe 50 hours to do that, and then rearranging, editing. And so it's a very time-consuming, but very rewarding, because you're always learning. And as a psychological researcher, I can say, honestly, I've never been bored. There are so many good topics. In the Philippines, we looked at faith healing, indigenous healing. Again, statistically, we compared people who had college education and people who didn't. There's, you know, again, why certain people eat certain diets, why people, and we've done quite a bit of research on exercise. And so that's another very, very big area. And there seems to be certain people who exercise a lot that are very hard on themselves and have high goals and it's never good enough on what they're doing. And then we find out those people are really at risk for eating disorder, kind of this perfectionist tendency. So there's a lot of very, very interesting things you can do in research, especially, I mean, for me, again, psychological research. And then cross-cultural research opens up the opportunity to go somewhere else and to learn about another culture and find out, wow, what is, in psychology, we call it nature versus nurture. What are the things that are universal? What are the things we find everywhere? And what are the things that are particular to a particular culture? So it's always interesting. It gives you a good opportunity to travel, meet people. And the other thing about psychological research, how many people like to go to parties and talk to people or go to coffee shops and talk to people? You find out people are usually interested in your research. Psychology is something that people tend to be really interested in. And so if you go and you tell them certain things that you found out, a lot of times people go, wow, that's really interesting. Can you tell me more? So I think it's a really good field to go into. Again, probably you won't be too bored if you're in it. And again, we can go into so many different directions. So thank you very much. You've been a great audience.
Thank you very much. Our third speaker, Timaree Hagenburger, is going to talk about her book, The Foodie Bar Way. So, Timaree.
How long do I have? How are we doing? 10 to 15. Okay. Shorter than the rest? Okay. My name is Timaree Hagenburger, and I think what I'd like to talk about is how I got here. So I started 6 years old, even younger, love food. I love food. So you may know dietitians or know nutritionists that are very concerned about the percentage of calories from carbs and protein, and I love food. I know the math, I can do all of that, but I absolutely love food. And I grew up with my grandparents, both sides, in the kitchen cooking. And as I was growing up, I thought, I think I want to be a chef. But then I realized life as a chef, I think I would lose the love that I had for cooking, because if you've seen these shows, it does not look fun. I mean, you're there hours and hours and hours, people are screaming, no one's happy. It's pretty tough. So I thought, oh, and I always liked medicine as well. So my mom actually was a dietitian. But you know, you don't want to do what your parents do. I wanted to be a race car driver. I wanted to drive for Porsche. I had all the posters on my walls. I wanted to be an FBI agent, you know, all kinds of different ideas. And the chef piece. But every time I had a presentation to do, whether, you know, be high school or what, I'd always do nutrition, because I would go to conferences with my mom and I would be taking notes, and I thought it was fascinating to learn about the human body. So then I thought, what am I doing? I want to study nutrition. This is perfect because I can do the cooking side and then I can do the science side. And because I thought, oh, if I'm a doctor, that's then my choice, and I don't really see myself as having a family. I thought kind of, when you meet doctors, you think like, I am a doctor. It's not just what I do, it's what I am. And I thought, I don't want that to take over my life. I want to have kids one day. So I thought, oh, this dietitian thing, okay, it's perfect. So I ended up going to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo for undergrad in nutrition. And just a little word of the wise, never say never, because I got caught a couple times doing that. I said, well, if I do my dietetic internship, because that's what, when you do a 4-year degree in nutrition, then you need to apply for a dietetic internship in order to complete those requirements and then take a national exam to be a registered dietitian. So I said, okay, when I do my dietetic internship, certainly I will never do it with a master's associated with it, and I will never do the master's in public health. That's what I did. You just don't know. You know, when I had all these ideas of what I was going to do, and then I started to look into options, and I thought I better not say no. So I ended up doing a master's in public health at UCLA with my dietetic internship at the West LA VA hospital, which is just kind of across the street. So I worked there, and then I came up to Stockton. Okay, so my husband got a job up here in packaging, which is a totally interesting field that you'd never even think about. There are people that test the sheer strength of the pudding cup lids, you know, like the little foil. They have little machines that peel it back to figure out how much strength it takes so that older people can open them and so it doesn't shred, you know, into pieces. There's so many fields that you would never even know are out there, right? So he was a packaging major. So we were industrial technology, which actually is a little side note, but industrial technology, half of his classes were business, half were engineering. It's really interesting. And then he did a packaging minor. So he, people in his classes ended up working at big manufacturing firms like Colgate and Quaker and Pepsi and things on the floor, because often the engineers and the business people do not speak well to each other because they speak different languages. So IT, industrial technology, bridges that gap. So it's kind of fascinating anyway. You get the 2-for-1 with me since that's what he does. So, but for me, I started working in the hospital, and I was not afraid. In dietetic internship, there were definitely women and men who said, I'll never work in a hospital. No, that's not me. And I thought, no, I want to learn. I really enjoyed my time at internship. I went and saw autopsies. I was in the middle of heart surgery. It was a see one, do one, teach one. And obviously I didn't do heart surgery, but I wanted to be learning as much as possible. So when I started working at County Hospital in Stockton off French Camp, you've seen that hospital on I-5, I realized this is where all the sick people go. And I thought, I don't know if I want to be able to make a difference. And with people, in most cases, they already had 6.7 diseases, right? They were already in pretty bad shape, and I thought, I can do more prevention. So I ended up working at WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, and then I could work with pregnant women and kids up till 5. And that was, that was fantastic because I felt like I was, making some of a difference. But I started teaching at community college in Stockton at Delta, back, 2000 was the first time I taught. And they had a class that they were offering, and it was a weekend college, Friday night and Saturday morning. Nobody wanted to teach it, okay? That was full time. So they said, oh, if you're interested, you can teach this class. So I thought, oh, absolutely, I want to try this. And I had a friend who I asked about it, and she said, teaching, oh. She said, that just makes my stomach hurt just thinking about it. And I thought, what did I sign myself up for? This is great. And she said, oh, no, they ask you questions, and sometimes you don't know the answer. She said, and there's tons of nursing students, and I'll never do that again. And I thought, oh, my gosh, what am I doing? Because it was at night. I worked full time, and then I was doing this first night. I was like, this is it. I love it. I don't care if I don't know the answer. I'll say, let's find it together. I mean, that's just, I was used to seeing patients in the hospital and, hospital gowns wide open in the back. I mean, you know, I dealt with toenails that are longer than you'd ever want to see, okay? All kinds of things in the hospital. People at their very worst, you know, and coming in and trying to be comforting. So I thought, I can do this. I loved it, loved every moment of it. But I worked super hard. I was working full-time. I moved over to WIC, then I went to the WIC state branch, and I worked writing policy and doing program evaluations throughout the state, and I was still teaching. Then I had the wonderful opportunity to get a job here full-time. There was a year that I taught 9 classes between the 2 colleges, and I breastfed my daughter the whole time, and I had a 3-year-old. So lots and lots of things going on. But I think a lot of times people assume that you finish your degree and it's like, okay, the job's waiting for me, and the hard part was college. And then I realized, oh my gosh, no, this is the beginning, but I've never worked harder and I've never loved it more, ever. And when I got this job, I had friends that said, oh, that's so nice for you. Are you gonna move to university next? And I said, no, this is the dream job. This is the dream job. Because this is the job where I get to make an impact on students every day. And I get to be in the parking structure, walking up to the 4th floor, just because that's good for your body, all right? And get to see students go, Hagenburger, I'm eating beans. Yeah. I mean, that is what keeps me happy, okay? And it is amazing, that connection. And I realized when I was teaching that students are so disconnected from food. They don't even realize that the food they're putting in their mouth is what's making every single one of their trillions of cells. So they just kind of, it's almost like entertainment now. You know, like, oh, I'm gonna eat this. It's not like it's gonna nourish my body, help me study, or what have you. So I started, all my nutrition classes would always be, okay, so there's folate in asparagus, but if you don't know how to cook it and you make it stringy and nasty, ain't nobody gonna eat it. And it doesn't matter how much of the vitamins are in there, it's not getting in your body. So I would always give them tips about how to cook. So I was approached to write a newspaper article in Lodi, where I live, back in 2009, 2010, end of 2009, and they said, we don't pay you. You have to get used to that. You don't get paid for most of what you do. And at any point, but and so I'm still writing every single month, no money, but I am getting this content out there, right? So I started writing an article once a month, and I started putting recipes in, and then a couple of years ago, one of my students, love her, she's from Puerto Rico, she doesn't have a filter, she just says what's on the mind, right? And so she says, that's it. I said, what are you talking about? She said, you gotta write the book. I said, what do you mean? She said, I have gone to your website, printed out all the recipes. Then I have my friends over. They eat your food. They say, oh, can I take the recipes? They take them 3 times. I'm not printing them out anymore. She said, you gotta write the book. I said, okay, I'll do it. Because I have been writing recipes since I was 6 or 7, right? And so thinking, you know, just my first one, okay, tea, cinnamon toast. All right, I can still see the little picture of the little notepad that I wrote it on, okay, but it was near and dear to my heart. So I thought, how am I gonna organize these? I cook all kinds of things. You know, when someone says, what's your favorite thing to cook? I go, I don't know, I cook so many things. I can't, it's like choosing, you know, my favorite child. I only have 2, but still. So I decided, one of my friends that I work out with consistently, we actually have been working out together on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I think we're going on year 9, okay? So, but you know, we do consistently. And she said, I want to know what you eat on a regular basis. She says, I don't want the special when you have, you know, 15 hours in the kitchen. I want to know, what do you feed your family? Because we eat whole food, plant-based. And so I was able to transition my family from in and out, okay, to, and you know, the things that I cook at home were always healthy, but what my version of what I thought was healthy. And again, never say never. Never say never. You know, you think a certain thing. I learned things in undergrad. I learned things in graduate school about nutrition. Totally flip them. There's so much information out there. I think one of the most important things you can do is be open and curious and never, ever lose your sense of wonder. When you learn something, and this is a little side note, but when you learn something new and it makes you uncomfortable, and I talk about this with my students, when I tell my students, Nutrition 300, you better wear a seatbelt, because this is not going to be, let's just highlight from the book together. No. We're going to learn things that are going to make you like, wow, that's not what I knew, that's not what my mom told me, this is, oh my goodness. And when you look at it and say, wow, that's interesting, I don't know about that, I want to learn more. I wonder. That is so powerful. Rather than closing down and saying, well, that's not what I learned, right? That shuts things off. So that speaks to the whole research piece. But my friend said, I want to know what you cook on a regular basis. So in our family, we like to have options. So we don't, my kids, for example, if I make salsa, if I make it the way I like it, Mia won't eat it because it has jalapenos in it, and Austin won't eat it because it has cilantro in it. So who ends up eating it? Me. And that's not the point, right? Our whole family. So what I do is I do a foodie bar, and that's the genesis basically for this book is one meal, lots of options, everyone's happy. So for our salsa bar, we take all of the ingredients that I normally would make salsa with in all separate bowls, and everybody makes their own. And they have it exactly the way they want it. So you are familiar with this concept because I'm sure you've been to Blaze or Blast or one of these pizza places where you say, I want this, 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 this on mine, right? And is it a problem that the person with you, behind you, gets something different? No, it's cool. Everybody's eating pizza, right? And they get it exactly the way they want it. So I came up with 32 bars, these foodie bars, from breakfast all the way through dinner, that sets up your meals like these bars. And then I came up with 94 recipes that supported those bars. So maybe a baked potato bar, right? And you could do something super simple like salsa and some steamed veggies, maybe some lime and avocado. Or you could upgrade, so each of the bars has a basic bar and a raising the bar section. So then you can upgrade and say, well, I don't want a regular big potato. Maybe I want a purple sweet potato from the farmer's market. And maybe I don't want a can of beans. I give you some advice, but maybe I want some of your seasoned black beans. So that's how that would work. And then because I love to make notes and this teaching piece of it, I have a section for each bar that allows you to keep notes, keep track of what combinations you put together. And it teaches you how to make dressings and pestos and hummus and all kinds of things. But it has opened the door to so many different opportunities. So I have now, with this book, spoken, and it, again, this is not, I have not even broken even for what I had to pay to put this book together. But I have been able to speak from Alaska to Florida, all over the place doing conferences and making a difference. People are buying the book and the ebook in South Africa, in Germany. I've had all over the world. And I don't know how they hear of me. I'm on podcasts and things. I do all kinds of interviews. It's just, there's so many different things that it opens you up to. But being able to have the courage to get out there and try something new and be open to the fact that life changes and your path, I could have never thought this is where it would go. In fact, something that's really kind of crazy, one more thing and I might go over, but is I was in Hawaii this summer speaking on behalf of the Vegetarian Society for Hawaii. So that was so cool because they paid my way to get out there. And they don't pay me, but they paid my way to get there. And so I took it. I thought that was fantastic, and it's a huge honor. So I was out there, and I spoke in Maui and in Honolulu. And when we were in Maui, we walked into a store, and I love to talk. We walked into a store of just different handmade things. And we were just walking around, my husband and I, and we started talking to the owner. Come to find out, he grew up like 2 miles away from my husband, where he grew up in Los Angeles. So they started talking. Fast forward, we ended up talking to him for 3 hours in his place. And then as we left, I thought, I want to go to dinner with this guy. I said, because he was doing all this stuff in Bangladesh, which is where he had all of this work from. And so we ended up going to dinner, and he was talking about the health issues they had in Bangladesh. And so he said, I said, what kind of nutrition, what kind of food do they have? He said, well, we have all these open markets. We have a lot of cauliflower, but there's no nutrition in that. And he said, and we've got these purple potatoes, but I don't think they're worth anything. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, these, and he says, we got lentils growing out of, our ears, but I don't think they're very helpful. So I opened my book, because I had planned to give him a copy of it, and I have a recipe for cauliflower lentil dish. He looked at it, he took a picture of it. Within 3 days, he had organized a class in Bangladesh teaching my recipes, and we were feeding all these people in this village that has never had any plumbing, that has this little lump of coal for a kitchen. Amazing. And they've done classes now based on these recipes. Never would have ever imagined it would go that direction. So be open to the world that is at your fingertips, because it's changing at all points. And please eat food that loves you back so that you'll be healthy enough to pursue these things, because health is huge in this process. You want to be able to have a clear mind and a strong body to be able to do this and change the world. Thank you. I'm sorry I went over.
Thank you very much, Professor Hagenburger. Our next speaker is Professor Rick Schuber, and he is going to ground his discussion in his article, Winning, Losing, and Wandering Play, Zhuangzian Paradox and the Daoist Practice. Dr. Schuber.
Thanks for the patience. The research Georgine asked me to share a bit about with you today consists in work I've done with Lynette Hunter, who is Distinguished Professor of the History of Rhetoric and Performance at UC Davis. That's a picture of Lynette. And she's every bit as wonderful a person to work with as you might think looking at the photo. Feel incredibly fortunate to have the working relationship with her that I do. One of the amazing assets we have at CRC is geographic. It's proximity to 2 major universities within a half-an-hour drive. Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk a little more about that asset during Q&A. Not all philosophy talks start with a story, but this one will. In specific, a story from the classic eponymous Daoist text, Zhuangzian. I'll quote from the classic text directly and offer sides before quoting from the paper with Professor Hunter, offering some asides, and then bringing the point to bear on a current matter of interest here at our college. First, then, the quote from Zhuangzian. Huizi said to Zhuangzian, "The king of Hui gave me some seeds of a huge gourd. I planted them, and when they grew up, the fruit was big enough to hold 5 piculs. A pickle is about the size of a bushel basket. If that doesn't mean anything to you, it's the size of a standard laundry basket. So imagine a gourd that's the size of 5 laundry baskets. I tried using it for a water container, but it was so heavy I couldn't lift it. I split it in half to make dippers, but they were so large and unwieldy that I couldn't dip them into anything. It's not that the gourds weren't fantastically big, but I decided they were of no use, and so I smashed them to pieces." Zhuangzi said, "You certainly are dense when it comes to using big things." In Sung, there was a man who was skilled at making a salve to prevent chapped hands. And generation after generation, his family made a living by bleaching silk in water. Right? The salve makes it possible to keep your hands in the bleach water longer and hence to be more productive at silk bleaching. A traveler heard about the salve and offered to buy the prescription for 100 measures of gold. The man called everyone to a family council. For generations, we've been bleaching silk, and we've never made more than a few measures of gold, he said. Now, if we sell our secret, we can make 100 measures in one morning. Let's let him have it. The traveler got the salve and introduced it to the king of Wu, who was having trouble with the state of Yue. Oh, interesting. The king put the man in charge of his troops, and that winter they fought a naval battle with the men of Yue and gave them a bad beating because the salve prevented the soldier's hand from getting chapped in the winter naval environment. Made it easier for them to handle their weapons. A portion of the conquered territory was awarded the man as a fief. He became a lord. The salve had the power to prevent chapped hands in both cases. But one man used it to get a fief, while the other one never got beyond silk bleaching, because they used it in different ways. Now, you had a gourd big enough to hold 5 piculs. Why didn't you think of making it into a great tub so you could go floating around the rivers and lakes instead of worrying because it was too big and unwieldy to dip into things? Obviously, you still have a lot of underbrush in your head. As my co-author Lynette Hunter and I understand this passage, it differentiates among what we think of as ordinary or conventional teleological use, extraordinary teleological use, and a non-teleological process constitutive of wandering. Chinese is yo. Gourds were traditionally used in China whole as containers or split as dippers. Notice, even if you go into a contemporary Chinese restaurant, the spoons look like a gourd if you put a couple of them together. The hand salve of the man from Sung, as Zhuangzian makes clear, was traditionally used by his family to facilitate silk bleaching. These thus serve to illustrate ordinary teleological use. The traveler's use of the same salve to facilitate a naval victory and to acquire a fief served to illustrate extraordinary teleological use. Finally, Zhuangzi's suggestion that Huizi used the gourd as a vessel with which to float around the rivers and lakes illustrates a non-teleological use constitutive of wandering. Zhuangzi's distinctions among ordinary use, extraordinary teleological use, and non-teleological wandering allows to develop a taxonomy of means, ends, and processes. Lynette and I are interested in martial arts and martial arts-related movement practices. So we point out that what we see as the Zhuangzian taxonomy allows us to differentiate among 3 approaches to martial practice. The first sees martial practice as having an ordinary use, such as the attainment of martial victory. Think battlefield applications of the martial arts or cage fighting MMA style. The second sees martial arts practice as having an extraordinary use, such as self-cultivation or self-improvement. Think Shaolin monks, who famously, tradition has it, began training martial arts on the advice of Bodhidharma, who's credited with bringing an early form of Zen Buddhism from India to China and teaching monks martial movements so they could develop the flexibility and stamina needed for extended sitting in the traditional lotus posture that Zen prefers. The third approach, the central interest of the paper, inspired by the Daoist movement practice that's already informed the martial arts in other ways, sees martial practice as an opportunity for the particular variety of Zhuangzian wandering that we call wandering play. The rest of the paper Lynette and I wrote seeks to illuminate wandering play via a series of fairly technical paradoxes, which we see Zhuangzi introducing at various points in the text. I'd like to very briefly focus on one of these, the paradox of Wei Wu Wei, literally action in action, or, as I'll pitch it for present purposes, accomplishing through being. The basic idea is straightforward. There are things we accomplish by doing, running a mile, and there are things we accomplish by not doing, falling asleep. there's a powerful way of doing things that has more in common with not doing than it does with ordinary doing. From the Zhuangzian perspective, virtue, de, in the Chinese, is the power that resides in a thing when it acts in accordance with its nature. The power that resides in a thing when it acts in accordance with its nature. At risk of gross oversimplification, we're at our most powerful when we are doing what is in alignment with what we are, when we accomplish through being. When we try to do things that aren't in harmony with who we are, we undermine our power to accomplish things. Back to that taxonomy. Ordinary teleological use, extraordinary teleological use, non-teleological use constitutive of wandering. Contemporary Anglo-European culture emphasizes doing over being. You meet somebody new at a party and you ask, what do you do? Someone has time off and we ask them, what did you do for your vacation? The importance of wandering play is that it allows us to emphasize being over doing. And by shifting attention to being rather than doing, wandering play allows us to discover who we really are. And, remember the previous point, in discovering who we really are, we discover our real power to accomplish things by aligning whatever we do with what we are. Maybe not. I said I'd close by briefly bringing the point to bear on a current matter of interest to our college. I'll be really brief. Our college is pursuing something called guided pathways as a way to improve student success. Guided pathways is very focused on doing. Something called a program map is at the core of guided pathways. And a program map is a list of things for students to do and when to do them. Basic idea is that rather than giving students a catalog and saying, hey, find a major, and by the way, you got to do general education, and you got a bunch of options. To say, tell me your major, and I'll tell you every course you're going to take between now and when you graduate, and I'll tell you when that will be. The theory is that if you ask a student what they want to do after they leave here, and then tell them what to do now so that they can do that then, the student will succeed. And there's some obvious sense in that, right? If you don't know how to get where you're going, you're less likely to get there. The question I wish to raise from the Zhuangzian perspective is this: how can we approach guided pathways? How can we orient ourselves to very explicit program maps in a way that supports students in discovering who they really are while they're with us, so they can align what they eventually choose to do with who they really are, and discover their real power to accomplish things in the process. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your thoughtful presentations. We have a little bit of time left in our program here today for student questions. So I turn it over to the audience. Does anyone have a question that they would be willing to ask one of our panelists or our panelists in general?
guys hear? You guys can hear? Okay. Yeah, I wanted to know, were you guys nervous at all? Because when I speak up in front of everyone, like, I start just shaking, you know?
Yeah, I'm still hella nervous. Yeah. I was nervous preparing for this. I was nervous walking over here. I was nervous listening to the other talks, and I'm still nervous now. I've been giving public talks for well over 20 years, and I still get nervous every time. The difference is I also enjoy the whole thing now, and I didn't 20 years ago. It was just painful.
Good. Good. Do any of the other panelists want to comment on their nervousness or the way they might deal with that experience? Thank you.
Yes, Jordan. I was nervous too, to an extent, and dynamics differ. Sometimes you're nervous just because you have to stand in front of people. This time, I was nervous because I really wanted to do a good job. I was hoping that giving some exposure to students about research, a dry topic, will be inspiring enough that you guys walk away with something that you not just sat through, but actually appreciate it. And hopefully one day, some of you are going to say, you know what, I went to CRC and I learned about research there, and that's what got the ball rolling. So just trying to do a good job there, that made me nervous. I tried a humorous approach. That sometimes can backfire if nobody laughs, right? That was a risk. So that made me nervous. But it's sometimes about just like the greater goal you seek to accomplish. So, and it just comes with practice. So yes, I think nervousness is something that's always with us. It just varies in different extents.
Thank you. All right, did you have a question right here?
Oh.
I'll hand the microphone to you.
Hello. So I have a question about the bars. How much does the book cost, first of all?
Something I didn't mention. The book has a, oh, okay, here we go. Something I didn't get to mention is the book has a recipe, a picture for every recipe. There were so many things that I could talk about in my 15 minutes, but one of the things I just gave you a little glimpse that my student was the one asking about it. So this book is dedicated to my students, and I had them in mind the whole time because the three things they tell me: no time, no money, and no experience in the kitchen. So that's why I wrote it with the basic bars and the raising the bar, but it's $25 is the price that I sell it for. They do sell it in the bookstore, and I sell it on Amazon. Amazon takes a gigantic chunk. I also, something I wanted to mention is the way that every single piece of this book is intentional. I spent a lot of sleepless nights putting this book together. And one of the situations, I don't know if you've experienced this, but whenever you see a specific ingredient that has a specific brand, often, or if you go to Costco, they'll carry things and then they won't, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, I was so used to this, and now they don't sell it anymore. So I was really mindful of trying not to produce a book that was going to be outdated by the time it was published. Because as we know, even with textbooks, right, every 3 years, and I knew I couldn't afford to do this more, just my one time. So I didn't put any references to any ingredient names. I just, on my website, I developed a shopping guide where I have pictures of each of the ingredients. So, for example, I have a pizza in here that uses lavash bread, and I put a picture of the specific lavash bread that I buy at Trader Joe's on the shopping guide on the website, and then that can be changed, and then students can take that on their phone to traders and go, okay, this is what I'm looking for, can you help me? So I was always thinking about the user, the end user, in mind the whole entire time. So that's something that because I thought through that process, then I don't have to say, well, yeah, you have to make, because they don't carry this anymore and this doesn't valid anymore. It becomes evergreen. So then I have that flexibility on my website. So thinking about multiple media to get your message across. So it was a combination of the book and California Bountiful videos that I do as well to demonstrate recipes. Those are available too. So hopefully that answers. And this is not granola bars, right? You get this idea that it's like taco bar. That's one, when you have to pick a name, oh my gosh, I can't tell you how much time it took just to choose the name. The index in this book took me, I think I calculated like 45 hours just to write the index. Because I indexed every single recipe and every single ingredient of every single bar. And so all these little details that you think, oh my gosh, oh, there's so much to it. So, and every picture was taken either by my husband or myself or a friend of ours that teaches in photography here at CRC. So it's really homegrown. One other thing I want to show you, how you can put your life and your heart into things. So this is a Italian seasoning recipe. So this actually is a picture of my grandmother's little napkin that she stitched when she was 5 or 6 years old in Italy. She's not with us anymore. She has passed away. But this, so I have the heart bowl, and this is the Italian seasoning. She's my Italian grandmother from Sicily. This is not just some stock picture, book full of stock pictures. This is me in a book. My students say, well, if I would eat well if I could take you home with me. And I say, well, actually, this is the closest thing that I can give you. I can give you the little nutrition professor. One of our students on campus drew a caricature one day, and she said, would you like to see a picture, a little caricature of yourself? So sure enough, she drew this little one. And so she's everywhere in this little book. And it ended up becoming my logo. I had a logo that was just the nutrition professor with a whisk, and then the little person came in. So it's just, things evolve. Absolutely. Okay, I'll stop talking.
Okay, I think that's a nice note to end on. Good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, audience members, for participating in today's event. We hope you have an outstanding afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you. Bye-bye.